Jordan, I have a silly question for you. One that's
Okay.
completely unnecessary and you probably think is stupid, but I'm going to ask it to you anyway because I asked our new coach at the gym this question yesterday and I didn't like his answer. And I'm hoping that I'm going to like your answer. And if I don't know where we go from there.
Can I ask a question before you ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Why didn't you like his answer?
Because it was incorrect. I don't think it was as well thought out of as it could have been. I put him on the spot. I'm just messing with him. I put him on the spot and he answered
Oh,
quickly.
I know that this is
But
going to be a question of that type, but okay.
all
But
right.
this was kind of like a setup. I just want to say because I said, "Why didn't you like his answer?" And you said because he was wrong. Okay.
Okay. Well, it's stupid. Get ready for it.
Okay.
Who would win in a fight between a gorilla and a grizzly bear?
Gorilla and a grizzly bear. Are there
Yeah,
tools involved or just the animals?
just the animals.
Okay, just the animals. I'm going with a grizzly.
Okay, I think that's the correct answer.
If there's option for tools, that gorilla is going to figure out how to do it and it's going to like stab that grizzly in the eye with a pipe.
They're smart.
Yes.
Gorillas are smart. That's their saving grace because, I mean, what's a gorilla like? 800 pounds. A male silverback gets up to like 800, something like that.
Dude, and their strength relative to their body
Isn't
is
immense.
insane. Like pound for pound, the gorilla is probably stronger than a grizzly.
But a grizzly, we're talking like can be
But pound for
1,200
pound
pounds.
doesn't matter when you're talking about like you can be like this is the most accurate rifle ever. Like, but this one's an atomic bomb, so like it just
Yeah.
everything dies.
Well, there's like 5-inch knives on the end of each. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's raw. It's walking around with 20 of those.
I also think a grizzly might just kill you for fun, whereas like a gorilla, like no, like might think about it, whatever. Grizzly's just like has Metallica playing
They're
on
murderous.
loop in its head. Yeah, just like or Slayer, like raining blood, just all the time.
Probably more like that. Well, that's what I forget who I was talking with, but they said about how they'd be because I talk about, I've hunted in Alaska 4 times now. I've hunted Montana where there's grizzlies and I talk about how they're afraid of that and like, but they will go swim in the ocean and where there's sharks. I'm like, I'd much rather have to deal with a grizzly than a shark any day of my life. And this might be false based on statistics, but just based on my logic, it's like, you know, sharks are dinosaurs. A grizzly's at least a mammal where we can maybe come to some kind of understanding where it's going to weigh the consequences of what might happen. And then the shark's just going to rip your leg off and move on with his day. You know what I mean? So I could be wrong about that, but that's how I feel about it. And
I think it's a gradient too, right? Like what kind of shark is it? There's all sorts of sharks.
okay,
So,
great white shark. Yeah.
yeah, white well, and I think statistically though, white sharks don't like fuck people up as much as other sharks. But that being said, I'm not an aquatic creature.
Exactly right.
Like you want to
Yeah,
come eat me for like a marshmallow floating on some hot chocolate, like they come up and just whoosh,
that's what I'm
there's not
saying.
much I'm gonna do about it. But like I don't know. You know what's I haven't been around grizzly bears, so but I don't know. I mean, I guess if there's certain spots where you're going through something really thick or something,
It's terrifying. It's
when all those
scary.
things happen, you know that there's not jack shit you can do about it. I
Can't do a
think in
thing.
either situation. So you have to just say, like, do I want to do this thing bad enough to where I'm willing to get eaten? If the answer is yes, like carry on. But mountain lions, I mean, we have so many cats here, and they're just like they're so sneaky and you don't it's not like you see them coming or they just show up like an
But they don't really
apparition.
fuck with people that much, though, do they?
um I don't same thing. I don't know what the statistics are, but I mean, I plenty of guys I know I run into them hunting, and the problem is if you run into them it's always like danger close, like they are 4 feet from you, like before you even know what is happening sort of deal.
Mm. From what I understand, I think black bears are more apt to hunt a human than a brown bear is. Like they will hunt. They're more statistically likely that you'll get hunted by a black bear for food, which isn't super likely, but it's more likely that that will happen than a grizzly. Like a grizzly, it's like all
Mm,
fear reaction or competing for a resource, from what I understand.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, but it could also be like, the reason why labs are responsible for more dog bites than a lot is because there's more labs
There's more
in
labs.
homes.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
same
yeah.
thing. Like, I don't know. But that being said, driving your car to the grocery store is still more dangerous than all of those things put together.
Oh, without a doubt in my mind. Yeah.
So
Did I tell you I did something stupid when I went to Alaska last year, though? I think I told you.
I don't know.
Maybe. So we were getting ready to go up this river just outside of Cordova, and we spotted a brown bear, like kind of on this like delta. I'll just call it a delta because I can't think of the other word to use right now. And it's just like this braided river, and it all fans out, and it's on the stones, and it's like it's on the stones. And I had, for the setting, the incorrect lens on my camera. And so I was like, oh, I got to get close if I want to get a picture. And so I hop out of the boat and I just start walking across these stones at this grizzly bear.
Looking through your camera or
Kind of both, like snapping
oh.
pictures, walking forward. And then I get like 200 yards from it. And I'm like, I don't have a gun. I don't have anything to protect myself with. And I'm just walking at this grizzly bear. And it, like, truth be told, it could smell me, and it seemed like it didn't want anything to do with me, like it was moving away. But nonetheless, like, it changed its mind. It's covering that 200 yards like fast. I mean, 200 yards isn't 200
faster
yards
than you're going to get back to wherever you came from.
Exactly right. And 200 yards isn't close really, but still, nonetheless, it's like, man, that was stupid. That was not a smart thing to do.
I am walking at a G bear.
Yeah, like a big dumb idiot. So
yeah,
don't do that.
At least don't
do that.
I advise against that.
Unless you're hunting it and you are armed and you intend to kill it, then that's another story. But don't just walk at it with your camera like a big dumb idiot.
I will take that advice to heart.
I hope that you do. Did I tell you about what happened in Montana? Did I ever tell you about how the grizzly bear walked in front of me? I didn't see it.
I don't think so. You told me about how you're singing Redbone on the way out.
Yeah, but opening day of elk season. So we're down not far from Yellowstone. I won't tell you exactly where we were on air. So because somebody else took me to their spot and I won't blow their spot up. So and so we're hiking up. We start hiking up the mountain at like 3 a.m, something like that, and try to get around to this ridge and get up above the elk because we know everybody's going to push the elk when they start shooting. And so we're trying to get up above them. And we got there and we got turned around and we're on the back side of the ridge that we're supposed to be on. And so I have an elk tag and my buddy Josh has an elk tag. And the two other people that are with us don't have elk tags. And so they're like, just, you guys hustle, because we heard gunshots. I'm like, son of a bitch, like they're shooting, first light. And so we try to hustle up this ridge and try to get around it. And there's like rock piles and scree, and it's like it's difficult to get around. And so we get up to where we can run around the ridge, and it's pretty timbered, and then it opens up into like kind of a meadow. And we get to the edge of it, and my buddy Josh is like, he's having a hard time keeping up. And he's like, dude, just go up to that knob. I'll meet you there as soon as I can. And so I sprint through this timber, this dark timber, get across the meadow and get up onto this knob. And I'm sitting there and not long after it, this guy, and it made me feel like such a pussy, because this guy pops up over the ridge in like jeans and New Balances. And he has like a Yosemite Sam mustache, and he and his wife just pop up over the ridge and they're just smiling. And I'm there in all my technical thousands of dollars worth of gear, and this guy's out there hoofing it in New Balances and jeans. And he says, "Do you see the bear?" I was like, "I didn't know. What bear?" He's like, "Oh, it's a big goddamn bear. It walked right in front of you. I can't believe you didn't see it." And so I went sprinting right through this timber. There's probably a grizzly, and I walked right in front of it, and I didn't even see the goddamn bear. And I don't know, apparently it was pretty close to me. So keep your head on a swivel, I guess, is the moral of the story.
Yeah, tunnel vision is bad.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to talk about exercise selection today. That's one of the things that we want to get into. Some of the things that, like, I want to talk about using different, like how we use some of the different movement screens, and then also understanding that there is a progression and regression to choosing exercises, even based on the day. And we build that into our programs, but to give people that aren't training with us yet the understanding of like, hey, it's from day to day, from program to program. Here are ways to think about scaling what you're doing, especially from a string
Espresso.
I know, isn't that amazing? I love
Library.
Chipotle. That's one of the ones that from people from central Pennsylvania say Chipotle all the time. It's fantastic. Oh man. And God, that was awful. And then what was I fucking saying? Just how to
Scaling
scaling
exercise,
exercises,
especially if something
uh,
happens, probably
something
is where you're going.
happens. Yeah, I mean, your recovery's down. You need to take a step backwards, or you want to take a step forwards. It's just understanding how to do that. And so we'll mash all that together. I was going to start with the movement screen stuff. Do you feel like that's appropriate?
Yeah, I was just going to say which movements. Yeah.
So we look at from a hip perspective, we look at the active straight leg raise, and we look at the toe touch. And so if you can the standard is if you can get the medial malleolus, which is the inside bone of your ankle, that's the easiest way to describe it, even with your knee on both sides while keeping both legs straight and one leg in contact with the ground, your hip mobility is decent. Okay, if you can do that without having to compensate at all. And then on top of that, if you can touch your toes while standing up and while keeping your legs straight, you're in good shape. Like you're able to translate your hips backwards. You're able to control range of motion at the hips, and you're able to, especially from the active straight leg raise perspective, dissociate your hips, which means keep one leg hip stable while the other one moves. And so that tells us if you can do all of those things, you have the requisite things that you need to deadlift from the floor, or at least with a big range of motion. And if you can't do those things, you probably shouldn't be deadlifting from the floor. Now, spoiler alert, I don't really think most people should deadlift from the floor anyway, because risk versus reward, it's just not worth it. Because with all of those degrees of freedom where you start from the ground, you're just increasing your chance for injury. So we typically have people do rack pulls or hex bar deadlifts if we're going to do a bottoms up loaded pull. And so we're looking at these things to say, okay, are you really even cleared to rack pull from below the knee? Like, and if you don't have those, here are the exercises you should do. And then on top of that, you look at skill and movement fidelity. So we do like our dumbbell RDL test, where people have to do a couple sets of 8 repeated and maintain good form. And then so what this tells us is whether or not the person has the strength, the repeatability of their strength, and their ability to maintain form while they induce stress. So if you can pass the active straight leg raise, you can touch your toes, and the dumbbell RDL test is good, we cut you loose to do the rack pull test or the hex bar test, which is really a measure of your relative strength. And so if you look at where all of these circles touch, it tells us what kind of deadlifts someone should be doing. Okay. For the upper body, we do a couple shoulder mobility tests. We do the Apley scratch test, which tells us essentially how does your shoulder and your shoulder blade move around your body. And we do just an active straight arm raise, and how can you get your arms overhead without having to compensate somewhere in your rib cage or in your thoracic spine. And this tells us, do you have the range of motion that you need to press and pull overhead? Because if you don't, that stress is going to go somewhere, likely to your back, somewhere in your shoulder capsule that's not really good for you, maybe to your neck, and you're going to have issues. And so we use these tests, whether it's the active straight leg raise test, the toe touch test, the Apley scratch test, or the straight arm raise test, to say to take things off the table. So we start with like, okay, everything's on the table. These tests tell us whether or not you should be doing something. And so it helps us dial in. It helps you dial in, because we teach everybody how to use this test for themselves. it helps you dial in on the exercises that you should be doing right now. And then also which mobility exercises you should be doing. And then within these tests, we have progressions and regressions. So for example, from a scalability standpoint, if we look at the deadlift, so let's say the top of the heap for us would be, you can use the hex bar, you're free and good to go with that. And then the bottom, we don't really program kettlebell deadlifts as much because we work online with people, and it's people are going to have more access to dumbbells that are heavy enough to train with than they will kettlebells that are heavy enough to get enough load with from deadlifting. So it's like dumbbell RDL, barbell RDL, rack pull, hex bar. So that's kind of like the scalability from a strength standpoint. And so using that example, let's say that you want to build strength and you're not cleared to hex bar or rack pull. You're going to live in the RDL to dumbbell RDL world, barbell RDL to dumbbell RDL world. And that's totally fine. And then as we work on that, the skill with hinging and the strength with hinging, and you work on your hip mobility and you work on your core stability, it starts to give you access to greater hip range of motion, greater control. And then it's better for us to start to load heavier deadlifting movements. I want you to jump in because I feel like I'm going to just keep going on tangents, and I want you to offer your more practical wisdom.
I don't know if I would use the term wisdom, but I think it's important for people to understand the reason that we do this is because it's common for people to say, well, I can't do this, so I don't deadlift. And
Right.
we can say, well, hey, no, you can actually still start building your strength in the deadlift. We may need to scale this, but you're still building, and just not just in the deadlift, but you're still building systemic strength. And especially if you look at, I mean, I know you were in the powerlifting world and I did too. Partial range of motion stuff, even people that can pull from the floor, whatever, they still, depending on what they need to work on all the time, they do block pulls,
Absolutely.
all that kind of stuff. So it's not like necessarily a lesser than, it just depends. Everybody's different. Everybody might need something different, but instead of saying, well, I can only deadlift 135 from the floor, it's like, well, maybe you have this performance limiter or anchor somewhere that we can work on, but also like, hey, once you get to your knee, you're plenty strong, your form looks good, and you can start building some good systemic strength there.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying, all these things can progressively get better at the same time if you do it right.
Yeah, perfect. And that brings up a great point and something to look at is like, when I first started running internship programs for people, for like gyms, for up and coming trainers, I had to teach all of these movements. And so I sat down and I was like, well, do I understand all of these well enough to be able to say, this is what a deadlift is, or this is what a squat is, and these are the things that you need to pay attention to. And so I did this project where I sat down and I wrote out a definition for all of the different movements, like what should stay still, what should move, how does this all look, what should happen from a pattern perspective, from getting idiosyncratic from the smallest pieces. And then I made every intern that I ever had after that do the same thing. And it just opened my eyes to really understand and see things in such a clear and quick way about what should move, what should not, all of that kind of stuff. And so, for example, you mentioned, scaling back the deadlift, and, you can still deadlift. Just because you can't deadlift from the floor doesn't mean that you can't train the deadlift and you can't train it well. And you say, well, what would be the marker of, can I deadlift from the floor? Well, the biggest thing would be, can you get the bar aligned so it cuts your shoulder blades in half while your hips are at least slightly lower than your shoulders, and your weight is centered in the middle of your feet while your spine is set in a relatively long and neutral position. If you can't get down there and keep your back flat, you shouldn't be deadlifting from the floor. And so really what you do is you walk that bar up by a certain level of degrees and inches until you find that point where you can keep the bar centered in your shoulder blades, keep the weight balanced in the middle of your feet, keep your spine long, and find tension. And so looking at that from how you would scale your exercises and how you actually train them is like, that's what good form is. And so when you can find that spot where you maintain good form, just train the shit out of it. And that's how you choose your exercises. You know, there's this concept called regression and progression versus lateralization. So regressions work on the pattern fundamentally, like your hip hinge, whatever it might be. And then lateralization still works on fitness. So for example, a rack pull would be a lateralization of a full range of motion deadlift. But when you look at that and you say lateralization, you know, it's not the point. It's not such that there's more to be gained from deadlifting from the floor necessarily, unless you have a very specific joint angle that you need to hit, or if you're competing. Those are the only reasons.
Exactly. That I think pulling from the floor is specificity for competing with powerlifting.
Yeah, that's it.
In most cases, like, because if you also get benefit on either side, right? So if somebody gets like really strong at a block pull, 6-inch block pull, whatever.
Sure.
Like over time, likely they could one day just go and say, like, I'm going to pull from the floor, and find out like, oh, actually, I can actually pull from the floor pretty comfortably now.
Yeah.
And because I pull off blocks all the time. And occasionally I'll go back to a straight bar and see. And my strength, honestly, isn't too crazy different. It's not this giant margin of what I can pull off the blocks versus the floor.
No. And that's, I mean, you gain strength like in 15 to 20 degrees on either
plus
side
minus,
of joint range of motion based on where you set up. So if you pull from the blocks that are, let's say, 6 inches, whatever 15 degrees below that range of motion, you're still going to gain strength. It's when you look at all of those things, it doesn't make sense to necessarily pull from the floor. You don't need to do it. And you're not less than because you don't know.
It's more opportunity for people to get out of position essentially through the range of motion.
So if you look at all that and you think about, okay, so what exercise should I be doing? You have to look at, well, what is the outcome that I want? What range of motion can I manage? And what kind of exercises would give me the outcome that I want? So for example, if you're looking at systemic strength, your two bests are going to be the squat and the deadlift, right? I would bias myself.
Will you tell them why? Yeah.
Because they recruit the most amount of motor units throughout your body of all the strength exercises. So like when you do a deadlift, you're going to recruit like 70% of your motor units if the weight's heavy enough. And that's just because the bar is attached to your upper body, your feet are attached to the floor, and you have to run tension through the entire system to be able to lift the bar. Squat, yes, the bar is attached to your upper body, but it doesn't require the same amount of upper body tension and force to complete the movement. So you recruit like 60 to 65% of your motor units. And a motor unit is a motor neuron and all the muscle fibers that are attached to it. So you're going to recruit way more motor neurons and motor units from doing like Olympic lifts and stuff like that, or full body medicine ball throws and things like that. But Olympic lifts are very skill dependent. And, we accomplish some of the other stuff when we do power training. But from a strength perspective, a lot of people call the squat king. I don't think that that's true. I think the deadlift is actually king. I also think it's an easier skill to learn from a demonstrating strength perspective. And I think for most people, it's potentially less injurious than a squat, because what happens when people squat a lot of the times is they create shear force and compression on their spine. And so whereas with a deadlift, you're mostly just going to get shear force, which I think is easier to manage. Whereas compression plus shear force, that's when you start shitting discs, shitting discs out of your asshole, which isn't like really what happens. That's a turn of phrase, Jordan.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah,
I thought that there was discs in my intestines, so I feel better now. Yeah.
So if you look at that, then so like, all right, I want to build systemic strength. What exercises are likely going to be best for me? It's going to be some kind of deadlift variation done in a rep range that in a range of motion that I can manage with a rep range that achieves the end that I'm looking for. Whereas if you look at a squat, yes, do we want to train the squat pattern? Yeah, we do, but we don't necessarily need to use that as our systemic strength builder. I know some people like it and they prefer it because their build, but especially back squat, because unless you are one of the unicorns that has incredible ankle mobility, incredible thoracic spine mobility, really good hip mobility, and then also has the leverages like a long torso and short lower limbs, it's tough to get in a position where you don't create that shear force and compression at the same time on your spine that I'm talking about. And so that's kind of how you can start to draw that circle around what do you want to do. So if you're looking at strength, just for example's sake, again, you want something that recruits a lot of muscle mass, that you can put yourself in a good position with form and with makes sense from a rep range perspective. And so that's why if you look at our programs, you're going to see things like hex bar deadlifts and rack pulls as our systemic strength builders.
Yeah. I think that was very nice. And I think that might help people to understand, like you said, for what we're trying to do. And if you're just even an average person that doesn't have like a very specific goal in mind, strength training, you want systemic strength, right? We don't necessarily want like very specific things. We want general systemic strength as much as we can get it, also from a like economy of time perspective, right? So hopefully that helps people figure out what they need to do and why. I think that's a good illustration.
And then if you let's look at the upper body. I mean, I typically like overhead, and if someone has the range of motion to do it, I like overhead presses more than bench presses, because they don't create the same restriction in the upper back that bench pressing tends to create. And they require less hyperextension from the shoulders. I mean, it's a better exercise. It's a more natural exercise. And because it's kind of loaded axially, which means vertically through the spine, I think you develop actually more full body strength from having to stand up, stabilize yourself, and press something overhead. That being said, if you can't press overhead based on your range of motion, let's look at the next level down. And that would be some kind of incline dumbbell press, because an incline dumbbell press actually recruits more motor units than a bench press, or an incline press recruits more motor units than a bench press does. So we're going to get more systemic strength out of something like that than we would out of a bench press. And so then let's think about the destructive aspect of the exercise, where if you look at a barbell, it causes more havoc than a set of dumbbells or a set of kettlebells will. First, because you don't have to stabilize it individually. So one side of your body can take more of the load and stabilize it, and you can do funkier things to get the job done. You can also load it far more heavily and have it with more intensity. So it's going to take more. And then also, because of all of that tension and the lack of having to stabilize from side to side, you're going to cause a lot more tension through your thoracic spine and potentially cause mobility issues there. And so when you draw all of these circles, you think, okay, I want upper body systemic strength. I want something that's not that detrimental, and I just need to express force and maintain my muscle mass. So you look at somewhere between that overhead press to incline press to maybe a landmine press, then to the dumbbell bench press. And then if you have the ability to load a closed chain exercise, which would be your body moves, but your distant parts stay still, like a push-up, that would be in my mind better than doing the dumbbell press, because your body creates its own stability and has to draw on it. But we include a lot of dumbbell pressing and stuff in our programs because a lot of people don't have the means to load push-ups enough to get the strength benefit. But that's where you have to look at, okay, so where can I maintain good form? And what am I trying to accomplish? And then how do I choose exercises? And then from there, it's scaling back from a skill perspective, And so you wanted to talk about, if scaling back from like workout to workout, week to week, whatever you might need to do based on your recovery. So why don't you jump in with that?
Um, and even further than that, I think scaling workout to workout, week to week, and also depending on what you have, all of that stuff's a factor, right? So workout to workout, like you said, there's kind of we look at there's certain exercises that they recruit more of us, right? So like you're saying, overhead press recruiting more than other variations of pressing. So depending on what workouts you've done during the week, how beat up you're feeling, if anything's bothering you, you might scale a further workout in the week depending on what you're doing. So like a good example for me, one that I'll scale pretty regularly, if I've like during the season, if I've been hiking a ton, and we're doing like rear foot elevated split squat, and I just hiked a boatload the day before. It's like my quads are kind of torn up, not so much so that I need to like switch my workouts around, but I might sub or just a reverse lunge instead of doing the rear foot elevated split squat because I've already kind of taxed my quads. So that's one that I subbed pretty frequently during the season. And then, once all that hiking and stuff is over, I jump back into doing the rear foot elevated and my strength is fine.
Yeah.
I'm not like, oh my gosh, I should have been doing rear foot elevated the whole time. Or certain things, and this is just my preference, for like HICT work. Me personally, I really like trying to do as much concentric stuff as I can. And anything I have to, it just pisses me off, and this is just me, but if I have to like pick up a dumbbell or like clean it up to do HICT work, I really like when I can just grab my kettlebells or whatever and go straight into the movement where I'm not moving it up or something. Sure. But that's also because I load HICT stuff like pretty heavy. Right. So same thing, like versus doing a a rack or something. If I do rear foot elevated or even just lunges, I'll put everything where it's at a nice height where I can just grab it, keep it in the low position, and go straight into the movement and set it down at almost the same height. So I'm not like bending down and like, deadlifting it up or cleaning it up. I keep it so I'll scale the movements to fit that need as I go. But then in terms of like exercise selection, I think the most common question I get from people is, I'm going to mountain bike or I'm going to snowboard or I'm going to go do this thing. What should I do? And they think that they have to change their whole workout around. And sometimes, depending on how taxing it is, I might say switch your days around. But if they go and like, oh man, my whatever, a certain part of me is really sore, really torn up, and you can just say, well, like, oh, just scale the regression, see that we got to drop down. Which one of those looks like it would bother you the least? Because I can't tell. And that like, oh, well, push-ups I don't think will be bad. And you're like, okay, we'll do push-ups for this workout instead of overhead press.
Right.
And so I think sometimes people look at like, well, I don't know what to do. And it's like, look at these, like you talked about the regressions. And normally when you just look at them, you're like, oh, this won't be too bad. If you've done the movement somewhat, you can look at it and say, I think this one will be less taxing because it is, right?
Yeah.
So workout to workout. And then based on recovery, the biggest one would be, most of the stuff we do isn't horribly taxing. But if somebody says my recovery is like in the crapper, heavy deadlifts are one of those things you go like, well, if your recovery's been junk a couple days in a row, heavy deadlift is probably like the first place I would look at regressing. Like that's going to be a big tax if your recovery's in the shitter and you're starting the week. Definitely scale that back to something easier, even if you got all the range of motion in the world, everything, just because that stimulus is going to take, it's going to take its toll for the reasons you said. Like you have a ton of recruitment And that's a good way to bury yourself, I
Yeah.
think.
For sure. No, the stimulus needs to match the recovery.
Yeah.
And so if you're kind of behind the eight ball, you either need to, if you want to choose the same exercise and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do, you need to have the expectation that you're likely going to have to scale back your intensity, and that means use less weight. But
And
go ahead. I'm
oh,
sorry.
no, and I just think that these are a lot of decisions for people. And so having that scalability versus really optimally, like we could say, well, let's flip these days around. Sometimes that is a big decision for people to make. Like, oh, I'm going to restructure my training week to do this, this, and this. The understanding to do that sometimes, or just brain power might be a little more, which our people just ask us, right? They say, hey, what should I do? And we're like, I'll flip flop these, do this, whatever. But if people feel like they really have to stick to the letter and they don't want to think too much about it, it's like, just scale that one down,
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah. Well, and that I think that people feel like they're losing something, or there's this big message that you're soft if you have to back down and exercise for a day, but that's just not true, because
No,
um, if you and one of the things that people don't realize is the fitter you become, the stronger you become, the more
you can dig that hole, baby.
conditioning you can dig a way deeper hole.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can put yourself further into a hole that you can't recover from the fitter you get.
Absolutely.
It seems counterintuitive, but you have access to more of your body's resources, and you
Yeah.
will burn them up faster.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the smartest things you can do is, like, there are times when I come in, if it's hunting season or whatever it might be, or, I went out rucking during the summer, and I was out in the mountains for hours at a time. And maybe the next day I just didn't recover from it as well as I thought I would. If I go in Monday and I'm supposed to deadlift heavy with hex bar or rack pull or something, I don't think twice about scaling that back to an RDL.
No, me either.
Because you don't have to continue to hammer on the system to get the stimulus you need to maintain or build your strength. You need to match the stimulus to your ability to handle it. And sometimes that means scaling back your exercises and choosing something. But I think the problem is like, a lot of times, like you said, people don't have the resources to know what or why or how to do that. They just think like, well, I just have to deadlift, where it's like, just for example, for us, like if you come in, you can't hex bar and rack pull is a bad idea, go to barbell RDL. If that's not going to work, go to dumbbell RDL. If you have access to kettlebells that are going to be heavy enough, go to kettlebell RDL and just scale her on back. I mean, if you're very strong, you're probably only going to need to go back to the RDL standpoint, and that's fine. For the squat, let's say if you are one of those people that back squats, that's going to be too much, go to the front squat. It's naturally going to be loaded more lighter to look more lighter. If that's, then you can back it off to a Zercher squat. You can back it off to a goblet squat. Same thing works with going to a single leg lower body push instead of a double leg.
Yeah.
With the pressing variations, you're never wrong to scale it back to something that recruits less muscle, depending on your mobility restraints, and going back to a push-up or going back to a dumbbell press, whether it's inclined or flat. If you're supposed to do an overhead press with kettlebells, and we don't ever have people overhead press with barbells, by the way, it's always kettlebell or dumbbell variations.
Yeah.
And then the same thing with pulls. Like if a loaded chin up's going to be too much, walk yourself back down to an inverted row, or walk yourself into some other kind of rowing variation that's just not going to take too much from your body, and just scale it back that way. And this is just, Jordan and I are just totally giving you permission to do this, because you're not hearing any other voices that will tell you sensibly that this is the way you should do things, because matching your recovery status to the exercises and the intensity that you're doing is how you stay consistent, and that's how you make progress long term.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even that's how you get ahead, right?
Yeah,
because
man.
our big thing is training consistency. And so the more you can train, right, the more you're going to get down the road. So even if it's a lighter session or something, if you're looking at, when you dip into the realm of possible injury, these other things, avoiding those things is all good. And we're not just talking about like, well, I don't really feel like training today. We're talking about, we like objective data, right? We like recovery scores, we like HRV, we like all that stuff, because, and then obviously if somebody has something that's hurt or bothering them, or and not like terribly hurt, just like, oh, my back's kind of blown up because I was rucking for hours, having that awareness, not just saying like, oh man, I really don't want to do these heavy deadlifts. We're just saying you have all this information and all these ways to deal with it where you can make informed choices and then keep on keeping on,
Yeah.
and not just blowing yourself up.
That's a good data point though, too, because if you're someone that typically has a lot of motivation to train, right? And your mood changes and you look at an exercise and it feels like insurmountable to go in and try to do that.
Yeah.
You should probably listen to that.
Yeah.
That's like with mood shifts, fatigue, changes in training motivation. These are all indications that your recovery is behind if you're not using some kind of objective measure.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's not a bad idea to scale that workout back if that's where you're at, because again, you can dig a further hole, and then not listening to that, you will further decrease your training motivation and make the rest of the week seem even more insurmountable. You need to go in, you need to make yourself feel better, leave a bunch in the tank, and then you'll be able to train hard again in the coming days.
Yeah, like 24 to 48 hours.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have both probably done training where you dread it.
Absolutely.
Right? Just fucking dread it. And that over time is so counterproductive.
Absolutely counterproductive.
Whereas if you look at a workout and you say like, man, it's gonna be hard, whatever, but I can do it. I can get through this, no problem. Other than like all day long, you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this session. I'm not looking forward to this, whatever. And it's like just almost like anxiety over doing the thing. And I'm not an anxious person, but when you're doing like intense or really heavy stuff, like I know you're much stronger than I am, but dabbled in the powerlifting world, like there's shit like that where it's just like, I don't want to, I really, really don't want to do this. I'm like a cat over a bathtub. And it's like, why are you doing that then? Why? Chances are it's probably not giving you what you want.
Exactly right.
If you hate it that much. So finding a way to enjoy training, still train hard. I don't want that message to be lost, like, oh, just take it off, whatever. Like, no, we still train hard, but train intelligently to where you enjoy doing it and will continue to do so long term.
There's also there's a big difference between fuck, this is going to be hard and dread. Like they're different things.
Legitimate dread.
They're different things. And I know exactly what you're talking. And I think that comes from overtraining one stimulus, whereas like you need first of all, for longevity and of health and to maintain all of your physical abilities, you need different inputs. And one of the best things that you could do that is change the inputs that you get, instead of just doing 4 or 5 hard strength sessions per week or 4 or 5 conditioning sessions per week. And when I say conditioning sessions, those strength sessions that like blend everything together and have you huffing and puffing and do all that, like that's still a conditioning session. If unless you vary the stimulus, like you're going to get to the point where you have that dread. Like back when I was powerlifting a lot and lifting heavy all the time, man, I would get to that point all the time. Yeah. Just because I was just hammering strength. And I was really strong, but I was a one-trick pony. And you have a different, I don't know, training just isn't as fun. So, but that's all to say that if you're one of those people that's typically very motivated to train and you feel that dread, it's like, that's something that you need to pay attention to. You're not being soft. Like your body and your psyche is telling you that you need to make a change that day.
Yeah. Well, and if you really want to go down that, well, we won't go down too far, but if you listen to, I know like from the powerlifting world, which I think it's good for people to look at other things, because there's this like mentality, like you're saying, don't be soft, don't be whatever. You look at somebody like Dave Tate, right? If people don't know who Dave Tate is, like look it up. But he'll say like the biggest thing, which he's been talking about for so long, is auto-regulation.
Yeah.
That is the definition of auto-regulation. That's not saying you don't have to do stuff that you don't feel like doing or whatever, but like really listening to yourself or looking at how slow you're moving or whatever it might be, making a change to keep moving you forward. You can't just, it's not this just beautiful linear thing where you just keep doing more and more and more and more. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, that was a great point that Dustin made in the Backcountry Ready forum the other day, where he said about Dustin's been with us since the beginning now, and similar training cycles for like three years. We do similar things at the same time every year, and to come back and compare your progress with that similar stimulus and see that you can just do more. Like it doesn't have to be this grandiose change. You just have to be on good training cycles, and you have to be smart with how you auto regulate. And you can continue to make progress, and with even similar amounts of volume,
and not at this, I was just going to say, not at an immense price.
Yeah,
right.
No, with similar amounts of volume, it's just, it has to follow a same progression, and you have to give yourself the room to scale back your exercises, scale back your intensity, make a change if you need to. I mean, one of the things, kudos to you, that we started including are rebound workouts. So if something happens, like, you have an extensive amount of life stress that week, there are other things going on that, fitness, you're in a big hole. Sometimes the best thing you can do is give yourself a stimulus to pull yourself out of that hole. And sometimes it's just a zone 2 session. Sometimes it's just a walk, but you creating the rebound workouts that people can sub in instead of a conditioning session or instead of a strength session. You're not just changing the exercise progression, you're changing the entire stimulus. And sometimes that's what you need to stay on track and to keep yourself moving forward, and not being a hardo about it. You have to think about, like, what do I need to move myself forward? I remember, I was thinking about this years ago, and it's like training exists on this spectrum between sleep and the hardest conditioning session or the hardest strength thing you've ever done.
Pretty much.
Sometimes the best training stimulus you can give yourself is a nap, because it helps you recover. It gives you what you need. Sometimes it's a walk. Sometimes it's a rebound session. Sometimes it's a zone 2 session. Sometimes it's a more intense cardiac output session. Sometimes it's aerobic power. Sometimes it's strength. And what is the stimulus that's going to move me forward? And when you can sit back and look at that objectively and remove the emotion from it, you can really start to make better decisions based on all of the information that we've talked about, whether it's exercise selection or the type of training that you're doing or how you're sequencing it.
And I think a good point to make in terms of when we keep saying, like, it's not soft, it's not this. If you really step back and look at it, it's really actually like a win at all costs mentality, right? You're saying, I want to move my training forward. And what do I need to do today to do that?
Yeah.
And some days that might be scaling back to move your training forward. And because you're saying, I'm committed to getting to this place that I want to be, and I will make whatever changes I need to. There's not a soft thing about that. That's saying, like, man, I'm, and also, like, you're getting people where they're like listening to their bodies, they're in tune with stuff. If they're logging any metrics, that's serious commitment to improvement.
I would argue that it's far more discipline and far tougher than trying to seek the reward, this bad big dopamine hit from doing a hard training session because of some kind of judgment you're placing on yourself because of where you're at.
And what I would argue too is, we get the dopamine hit and stuff, but I know you and I both have done training sessions where it's so brutal that there isn't the dopamine hit. You're just fucking destroyed.
You just hate being alive.
You're destroyed. And so if people are like, oh yeah, I got my dopamine hit or whatever, my argument would be like, you've never been to the deep end of the pool then.
Yeah.
You're living in this happy, like, medium place where you think that this is really, really, really hard, but we're talking about like the deep, deep, deep end of the pool, like Blackoutville, like 10 out of 10. Yeah. And it's like, for me, at least, there's no dopamine hit after that. There's like, you're just leveled, and like you said, I think it's really good to understand that continuum between sleep and literally full blast. And like you said, training that lives in between those places.
Yeah.
I think it's really good.
It's a tough thing to touch because it's very difficult to take that governor off. Like, for most people, but I don't know. sometimes when you have an insatiable curiosity of like what you're, well, where is the limit? You know, that's
Mhm.
sometimes that gets you in trouble. And the problem is there's a lot of voices that say that's the cool thing to do. And far be it for me to tell somebody to not find their limits, because it's something that I've certainly pursued over the course of my
Yeah.
life. But it's like, do it once, do it twice, then leave it the hell alone. You know what I mean?
Well, know where your limit is, and then also know that if anything you look at scientific, any study, whatever, adaptation and all those things don't happen necessarily at
At
the
your
limit.
limits.
They
No, they
happen
don't.
under the limit. So if you want to know where your limit is, sure, go and find it. And are you actually going to find it? Are you actually going to push that hard that you actually find your limit? Like, I would say a lot of people really have it. So they think that they're at this 10 or whatever. And it's like, well, are you really? You know, I don't know. I think
There's a
it takes
different
a
10. There's like the 10 that you can impose on
there's
yourself, and then there's the
mhm.
10 that you can get to when somebody else is imposing it upon you. And I can tell you that I've had, one of my mentors back in the day, James Smith, they call him Smitty, from used to be called Diesel Crew, then Diesel Strength and Conditioning, and all that kind of stuff. I would go do sessions with him at his gym in Elmira, New York, and he would just fuck me up. And I
Yep,
know that I couldn't have gotten there by myself. Like
totally.
there's no way I would have got there by myself.
I have a friend who is a similar way, and it's like, if you're talking conditioning, people are like, oh, that was a 10 out of 10. I'm like, for me, 10 out of 10 is I am completely cramped and I'm throwing up.
Yeah.
I've been there. Like, and same thing. I didn't push myself there, but I've had a training buddy where like we've gone there. And it's like, so I know that a 10 out of 10 is not a productive place to be because
No,
I've been there.
doesn't
And
help you.
so, like you're saying, self-imposed 10, like, wow, I got my heart rate in the red zone, whatever. I could feel awesome about myself. That's a 10. We're talking on a grand spectrum of this is where we've been, and we can tell you don't need to go to that
Yeah.
place.
There was one time I was in college, and I was, I put myself through a sprint workout. And this was all like during the summer. I would work landscaping. I would train for football after I was done with landscaping, and then I would just like go to bed and do it all over again every day. And I went up to the track above my high school and just ran and ran and ran and ran and ran. And I just like, I threw up, I cramped, I stumbled home. And like when I got home, my quads were locked up, my hamstrings were locked up, then my calves locked up. And my mom walked in the door from work and she was just like, "What are you doing to yourself?"
You're an idiot. Yeah.
And that like clicked for me. I was like, man, you gotta chill out. Like it's all right. And so, and then I just, even at what would I have been, 21 years old, I still couldn't do shit for like the rest of the week. Like
Yeah.
because first of all, because I was working 8 to 10 hours a day, but then also just like I took so much for myself that I missed out on all of this good stuff that I could have gotten in. It's just, that's all to say, like, I think it's interesting for some people to go and try to find a 10 because like it's good to know, but like the good things don't happen at a 10. Like you
No.
have to leave resources in the tank so that your body can adapt to the training that you give to it. And then understanding that super compensation is a real thing. Like you go to the line, then your body, when you leave it enough resources, adapts beyond the line
Over
that you
that.
took it to, so
Yeah.
that costs you the less the next time that you do it. And so, you don't have, for example, when I deadlifted 615 pounds, the heaviest set that I did leading up to pulling that was 505 pounds, which is like 80 some percent of my max, was the
Hmm.
heaviest set I did during that training cycle. But I did a lot of skill work. And then that tension was enough for me to have that carryover skill to pull heavier. And so you have to understand that these are all part of your body compensates beyond the stimulus that you give it if you leave it enough resources to do so.
Yeah, I think that is a very good example because, powerlifting, you'll see people sometimes maybe they'll get up to their opener in training or something like that. But a lot of the time, the first time they're touching that weight is in the meet,
Yeah.
right? It's not like, oh, I've done 1,000 pounds 10 times before. I know I can do it. No, they're getting to, like you're saying, super compensation. They're looking to raise that ceiling. intentionally. So the way they train is not by doing that same thing 10 out of 10 over and over again, because that won't get you there. They're looking at doing that to the first time they do that weight is going to be, on that platform or whatever. So I think maybe if people need some validation, you could step back and look at these other arenas and say like, oh, there's some definite merit to that,
Yeah, because it's the top 1% of your lifts of all
Mhm.
time is what you're doing there. And to think that you could sustainably do that throughout training is
Yeah.
ludicrous unless you have like no training age.
Well, and the best part about that is when there's that opinion and attitude, if like I say, you look at other places where people are looking to specifically do that, and they would go like, that's stupid. You can't do that. Like if you wanted to power lift and they're like, oh, you just go in there and just do your max every single day. For some people, depending on your training age, that might work. But like you say, once you get to a place where you can really dig yourself a hole, like it doesn't work.
It doesn't work at all.
And any of those people would say like, no, you can't. I mean, and that things like that are like conjugate, or whatever you want to look at. Like that's how they got around those things, is by varying movements, that sort of thing, to not, just crush themselves while they're training heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it comes down to leaving the game for the game. And
exactly.
Then that's one of the reasons that we, of course, if you kill an elk, you're likely going to have some 100-pound pack outs.
You're going to find out. Yeah. You're going to, and then like play the game, do it,
play the game,
let it hang out, like go for it.
But
on your hunt,
you don't need to play the game all summer. Like, dude,
no.
The heaviest, I mean, during HICT, I'll have 100 pounds on my back, but it's a very controlled environment. It's like we're stepping up, we're stepping down, we're stepping up, we're stepping down. And
very
it's like
specific.
A handful of times. It's not rucking every week with 60 to 100 pounds on my back.
Yeah.
Heaviest rucks last year for me, well, I guess, it would have been 2 years ago now that I went elk hunting, were 50 pounds, maybe 60 a couple times. And then, with gear, equipment, and everything, like I did, 2 packs on the north side of 100 pounds and was just fine because it was consistency and not beating myself up by doing all of these crazy rucks all the time.
Yeah. And I don't go over 50. But that being said, like I still can, like, I haven't, my last year wasn't big and I had a buddy that helped me, but like I've packed a whole mule deer by myself and I had not trained with that weight. And I look at it and like, I can do this. This is gonna fucking hurt, but I can do it. And get done and, whatever, and be like, a little sore, like depleted, that whole thing. But that's, like you said, that's the game. That's game day. So, whatever, you need a couple days off from training or whatever after that, like, cool. That's your Super Bowl,
exactly
so
right.
It's like, you can ruck with 50 pounds all summer, but that's not the only thing that we're doing that makes you strong or makes you capable. It's
exactly
this
right.
All of these things put together. And then not only that, but understanding your effort and intensity and all these things and how to manage that, versus like you could take 2 people of the same, you could clone 2 people and you could say like, go do this task, and the pace or manner in which they do the task, they can have totally different outcomes if they're aware of like how to go about it, And so if it takes you 30 minutes longer to pack out your deer because you're like, it doesn't matter. And if you're like, oh, I understand that, I really want to enjoy this and I'm going to play this game with myself. Like we had talked about, like looking for that perfect seat high rock so you don't have to take your backpack off. People that can do that sort of thing over and over again, like that's where we get people where they can play that game, where they can do that, where they know themselves and have a very good handle on effort, intensity, and cost.
Yeah. Perfect way to say it. And I think that's it too, where it's just not imposing this value system on yourself where you feel like you have to kill yourself getting out, or you're not tough, or like you have to march 6 miles back in with your house on your back, or you're not doing it right, or you know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's like all this stuff that just doesn't matter. And on top of that, realizing that if you do have yourself in a situation that's difficult, you're able to do difficult things by doing a lot of stuff that's moderate to easy, and then that makes the difficult stuff easier. And
absolutely.
it's a tough concept to grasp, but like once you do it and you trust it and you're like, man, yes, that is the way. That
You
is
know
how
it.
you do it. Yes.
Well, and I think too, looking at we're looking at all of those things, and the way, like you're saying, to make things easier is when we have people come in, the reason, we do the movement screen and we do all these things is like we're finding what people's limiters are,
Yeah.
right? If you don't move well, you don't do this. And so every time we get people that come into the program, like, wow, there's a lot of mobility. There's this is new to me, whatever. So, and they could be strong, they could be maybe aerobically fit, but they're every time they're like, oh wow, there's all this stuff that I haven't addressed, and it's not necessarily like things that are 10 out of 10 intensity, but they're like, whoa, I haven't been doing these movements or haven't done this or so. And then in a couple months, we get them where like they're good at everything,
Mm-hmm.
they're good at, they move well, their relative strength is good, their aerobic fitness is good. They get all of it. And then it's the understanding, like you said, once you know it, they're like, okay, like this is what I need to do. I need to be good at everything. And it's that takes some planning, it takes some
It
doing,
does. It does. And it takes experience to trust it. You have to turn
for
yourself over
sure.
to it because everybody else is telling you that you gotta fart blood and, to get things done. And it doesn't have to work that way. So,
Well, and to be fair, I think we get people that things haven't worked for them. That's
oh,
not
sure,
uncommon.
sure, sure,
And they
sure.
go like, man, I've been doing this and like this didn't work or whatever. We get that. But also, I think that you could take an average person doing whatever, just strength training, or just maybe they just run or whatever. You could take them, and if you dump them into our program in the spring, even now, and said, hey, this is what so and so is doing, I want you to do the same thing they are, it would crush a lot of people.
Absolutely
But
would.
not just because of the intensity or whatever, it's because they lack mobility, they lack skill, they lack athleticism, all of these things, and
Or,
it would crush you,
or even the mentality on how to approach it. You know what I mean? And
yeah, like
just,
looking at, you have to set a timer to beep 48 times 3.
yeah.
Them looking at that going, well, what, I have to do this thing almost 150 times. And it's like, well, yeah, but we're going to teach you how to get through this.
Oh yeah, but dude, it's like we see it. We had a couple CrossFitters this time last year come to our gym and do some of the similar workouts that we do in Human Predator Packmule, and it just crushed them because they're
Mm-hmm.
so used to this just hot, burn, fast type of mentality that not only did they approach the workouts incorrectly from a mentality standpoint, they just didn't have the juice, man, because it's
Yeah.
just it just they can't sustain the effort. And it's learning how to sustain the effort by approaching it with the right mentality and also like understanding what it takes to sustain effort while also building the fitness to do it. It's just far different than what a lot of people are preaching.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for people to take that into account if when they're looking at, you know, saying to dial back or to whatever. But if you look at the whole grand spectrum, that's why we say to dial back a certain piece is not a big deal, because we're looking at everything. We're not
Yeah.
just saying, well, you just need to deadlift 405 for this workout. It's like, no, we want you to be good at every single thing, and making that all jive and work together is not, you can't just do everything at the max.
Yeah.
You just can't,
And
it's like
realizing,
saying, yeah, and understanding that.
yeah. And realizing not just the specific game that you're playing, that which would be your elk pack out or whatever it is, the overall game of
Yes.
being able to do these things that we love and to enjoy what our bodies are capable of and to use that as fuel to live the best life that we can in the mountains, out of the mountains, with our families, whatever it is. It's a long game. It's a
It
long,
is
long
a
game.
long game.
And you got to step back and look at that. You got to step back and look at it, or else you just put this weird pressure on yourself to do shit that you really don't need to do, you know? So
Yeah. And that long game takes some serious commitment, and it takes looking at,
which is way harder than doing stupid hard workouts all the time. Way more difficult.
Yeah. And to say I need to do this for a year or 2 or 3, that takes some serious commitment on the end user's part. And it's a very, like you said, just a total holistic thing to look at the thing full circle. But then in terms of talking about what you're capable of, like, this is how people get better year over year over year, even in their 30s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah.
You can continue to get better
Absolutely,
and be good at everything. So I think that is I guess it almost sounds impossible maybe in some ways, but that's the name of our game, I guess.
yeah. If you generalize with the right things and you have a good training plan, you can raise your level of your overall fitness in every realm. You can do that seriously, consistently, year in and year out. So
yeah. And then even if you get to a point where you're like, I'm happy with where I am, it's like, okay, well then you can maintain that. But once you get to that point, you have to keep training to keep it there.
Absolutely.
Continuously have to keep, you don't just say like, well, I'm there, time to pack it in.
It's perishable. Fitness is perishable.
Absolutely.
Like peas, like frozen peas.
Well, frozen peas, I mean, I feel like they last a long time. So
I hate peas, dude. I don't even know why I
really,
brought them up. I don't like
I
them.
love peas.
Weird.
I don't eat them very much, but I do love
weird.
peas, corn, all that, like crunchy little sweet vegetables.
I like corn. I just not peas, man. I don't like them.
I can't help you with that.
Well, anyway, I'm gonna include 2 links in the show notes. One is for our home gym essentials list. So if you are someone that wants to train at home, has no choice but to train at home, and wants the essentials list for a minimalist home gym, you can download that for free. And we still have 5 biggest backcountry training mistakes. That'll help you avoid the biggest pitfalls, some of the things that we're talking about throughout this podcast, and what to do instead. Again, that book is totally free too, and you can snag both of those at the links in our show notes. Yeah.
Superb.
Okay. All right, Jordan.
I know you're going to say something weird now.
No, I'm not. I'm just going to be done.
Okay, fair enough.
Right, cool. All right, yeah, no, it's great. All right, well, it's nice chatting with you. Tell Lucy and Matilda and your wife and daughter, and I won't say their names on air. Say hi to them for me too.
I will say hi to your girls as well for me.
All right. Okay. All right. See you. Hey, did you see a guy real quick before we go? Did you see a guy thought you looked like Adam Weatherby? Commented that on the Instagram post yesterday.
No, I didn't.
He's like, I thought that was Adam Weatherby for a minute. So apparently you look like Adam Weatherby.
Is that good or bad?
I don't know. I just think it's a thing.
It
just is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Adam Weatherby's home gym would probably be like way better than
very
mine.
nice. Very nice home gym.
Like
the guy actually tagged Adam Weatherby in it and said that he should follow us. So there you go.
Yeah.
He should.
Okay. I'm all for that.
I'm on board.
I'll be his doppelganger.
I didn't see it until the guy said it, but now I kind of do see it.
Okay, well, I'll have to look at who Adam Weatherby, what he looks like. I mean, I know who he is. I don't know what he looks like.
Have a look at a few pictures.
So maybe I'll be deciding to see if I'm offended or not.
Weatherby Element's a nice shotgun. I like the Element.
They're making some cool lightweight stuff.
I don't like the 18i. I don't like that one, but I do like the Element.
Oh, I mean more on rifles. I'm not too familiar with their shotguns. I only shoot old warships, so
yeah, which I appreciate about you. So. All right, see you later.